All right. So we got about another minute. I'll let everyone hear our voice. I see some people were able to stick on with us. Love that. I'm assuming you guys are working on emails, checking your Slacks, making sure that everything's still, nothing's on fire. I actually had a friend of mine text and say, hey, like, is this going to be recorded? I got some fires I got to put out. As a reminder, yes, we're absolutely recording this session. You'll be able to use the same event link to be able to access the full recording. So for those that didn't have fires pull you away, thanks for sticking around. I'm excited to what Lori will be able to share. And actually, not in LinkedIn, but I did see some chat or some questions come up. So I was curious, Laura, like one thing I think some people might be thinking about, maybe get to it in your presentation. If you do, just let me know and we'll wait to have that answered. But how are back office people going to feel about getting scheduled, right? I think a lot of teams that are in this back office space maybe enjoy an element of autonomy that contact center agents aren't used to having. So have you noticed that when it comes to back office scheduling in particular, are there some challenges? And if you can address it if you address it in a later slide, just say, we'll get there, Dan. But if not, how do some people feel about getting scheduled in back office?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and I actually don't cover scheduling during the presentation, so thank you for not stepping on my toes.
Good.
But look, scheduling from a back office perspective, and I guess you're absolutely right, and I do kind of touch on it. It does create a sense of autonomy from an employee perspective, and I think that there's this perception of this whole Big Brother kind of situation, but I do actually touch on it a little bit more, but it's it's global in terms of the feeling that they get that they are going to actually have a schedule. But what's really interesting is that as I mentioned before, the contact centers and back office staff typically they report to the same reporting line. They're using the same software, so one of the first things that I find back office typically do is actually roll out schedules to their staff. So that, that's an easy fix, right? Forecasting is the hard bit, but the easy bit is, applying schedules to staff so that they know when they're working or what days they're here. But we don't ever typically talk about adherence to schedule. It's not something that is necessary from an operations perspective. So, but it does actually, it's just a way that the environments have started to kind of dabble with, that change process in getting people to, start to adopt the fact that they're going to have schedules. They're going to start seeing stuff online. They're automating annual leave processes and those sorts of things. So, it's definitely something that we're seeing. And we're finding that because they're taking those baby steps from a back office perspective, that people are more open to accepting that, that's what they're doing because they're not actually being adhered to that schedule. There's no way, in some instances, from an operations perspective, there's not a way for staff to actually track their time like you do in a contact center. You pick up the phone, you dial, you log in, it automatically starts counting what you're doing, how many calls you're getting, what breaks you're on, those sorts of things. And they're, the way that it works, it drives you to make changes to your aux code so that it can be tracked. That doesn't happen in the back office. So, the fact that they're just getting schedules to monitor, and it gives them visibility of who's there and who's not, who they can trust, who they can talk to, especially with the work from home environment that we're living in now. Who's actually available for me to pick up the phone and call to have a conversation about, a difficult case that I've got, or I need to, clarify something with them. So, it's actually providing a lot of benefit, and we're seeing that adoption for, implementing schedules in the back office is actually, it's more broad than we initially thought. It's actually happening now. It is the first step, usually, with implementing WFM into the back office space.
Super helpful. I know you've got an agenda. We've got some pieces coming up. Maybe as I go off camera, you can let everyone know what we're going to be covering over the next little bit. And as a reminder for those that maybe came in late that are wondering, like, how does this work? We'll have another section here, probably about 45, 50 minutes or so. We'll have another break, and then we have a third section still to come. But yeah, Laura, what do we got to cover this next time? And I'll just kick it over to you.
Sure. So in the next section, we're going to have a look at, the back office specifically and what is work. I'm going to talk a bit more about work in the back office and what it looks like. So, as I mentioned during that chat, scheduling is one of the first things that is implemented into the operations space because it's easy. But forecasting is much more difficult. So what I'm going to cover in the next section is, well, why is it difficult? Why is it so hard? And what are some of the things that we need to think about or consider when we're looking to build out a forecast for the back office space? So thank you for that, Dan. I really appreciate it. So uncovering what work is in any industry requires you to take a learning orientated approach. And any information that I give you is based on my experience with customers that I've actually had implementing back office WFM into their space. So, while you don't actually need to be well versed in, all the intricate details about what a customer actually does or what the type of work is that they do, it is important to gain, a basic understanding of the business that you're about to support. So, and how they contribute to each team. So how the business actually interacts with each other. There's definitely process flows, and we'll talk about that a bit more. So, the effort that you apply to gain an understanding of the desired outcomes, the results, or the end product is actually crucial. It's really, really critical for a couple of different reasons. So I'm going to just talk about two to start with. First of all, as a workforce manager, you need to be able to translate the business processes into a forecast that can actually be used to build a workload demand and effective resourcing plans. So we've already got our schedules. We need to know how much work we've got coming in from a workload perspective. And the second reason is you need to be able to gain confidence from the leadership team that you actually have the right skills to support them in running their business. So we need to remember from a WFM perspective, we're not going in there in the back office space to take over what they're doing. We're going in there to support them. So it's a little bit of a different mindset. You need to be able to demonstrate how you can work collaboratively to achieve the end goal for both of you and for the organization. So WFM in the back office, it requires a different mindset compared to the contact center. And depending on your success criteria, your responsibilities and accountabilities will vary. So it's important to establish relationships really early on. It's also critical to establish accountabilities, expectations, and the success criteria to ensure that you're all on the same page. So what is work? Work names can vary from business to business, department to department, organization to organization, and industries. The names that are given to work will vary, regardless, depending on where you are. You might find that depending on the software you have, there may be different terms that are used that will drive an organization conversation in certain directions based on the words that they use. So, in the back office space, the terminology and definitions can be different. When you're having conversations with the business, I use the business terms for defining work when I'm going in and doing a consulting piece, because I don't want to step on their toes. It's about, really being able to demonstrate that you can accommodate a leader's requirements to help support them in their business. I find that in doing that process, you're actually going to get more buy-in. And just remember that it takes time to really gain leader's confidence. So that's kind of important. I have another little poll. So I'd want you to just list out some of the names or terms that are used to describe work in your back office space. Now, just bear with me for a moment and I will get this up and running. Let's go to poll 2. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes to just scan the code and put those words in there. So claims, filling prescriptions, packing boxes. So I'm seeing different industries that are on the call here, booking follow-ups. Yep.
And as those responses are coming in, I'm curious, what are some of the weirdest or kind of most, well, not say weird, most unique, that might be a nicer way to say it. What are some of the most unique terms that you've heard, right? So I see some email, chat, tickets. Those all make sense. Are there any in particular that you can remember from your years of consulting of like, that's a new one?
Look, I've been doing it for a long time, Dan. And I guess, yeah, there's nothing that really kind of surprises me. It's all pretty consistent. I find that in the back office space, there's some consistencies, from business to business. And that's the thing, even from a WFM perspective, workforce management is workforce management, just the concepts of processes and practices might be different. So there's nothing that's really, kind of standing out for me at the moment.
And that's what I guess I would say then to the rest of the audience, right? To where I think so many of us kind of get stuck in our environments thinking that we have this super unique environment and no one does it the way that we do it and no one talks about it the way that we do it. A widget is a widget is a widget, right? Like we've kind of heard it all. And from your years of consulting, you've kind of seen it all, whether it's emails or packing boxes or filling prescriptions or completing tickets or whatever this might be. It's just work. And I think that's kind of the point that you're getting at. So we'll leave the poll up a little bit longer. Some other pieces are coming in. I'm watching the responses come in over here. Questionnaires, tedious. I like that, right? How do you describe tedious? Spot on. I love the audience, the honesty there. But yeah,
tedious is probably the first one I've seen. That's quite interesting. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think in the back office, some of the work can be tedious.
Yes.
And that's where automation comes into play. I don't really talk about automation here because, we could talk a whole week about automation in the back office. It's something that's been done quite well in most instances. So, those tedious tasks typically are, covered by a bot or AI or, sure, some other sort of, investment that the business has actually put into reducing resource requirements to get rid of those, mundane activities so that people are doing more interesting work.
Absolutely. All right. Like I said, we'll leave the poll up. So as people want, they can continue to add in multiple answers here, but super helpful and interested to hear some more.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the responses. It was nice to have a giggle. It helped me relax a little bit. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about work. So there are many different times that are used to describe work in the back office. And, they put these work types into different categories. So from a forecasting perspective, and I'm going to talk a bit more about forecasting, we do have, a couple of different ways that work. And this is specifically, I guess, not specifically, but, thinking about the financial industry, government industries, processing work. These are some of the terms that are actually used in our environments where we're describing work. So we've got new work, we've got, follow-up work, we have pending work, we have rework, the big rework, and we have backlog. So there's a lot of different things, different types of work that need to be considered in the back office compared to the contact center. So in relation to work, so when we talk about work, new work that's coming into the business, they will be new work items. It's usually a new work per team. So if we think about those siloed structures with the organization structure that we were looking at before, each of those different teams will have new pieces of work that will come in. Typically, it's designed or refined or defined as the first time that work is actually in that queue. So it hasn't been worked on yet. It's a brand new piece of work. We've got new arrivals that are coming in. It has lots of different terms. But when we talk about rework, and I do want to talk about this a little bit because rework is actually quite critical in terms of understanding what it is and its purpose. So internal rework can consist of things like processing errors, missed information that hasn't been collected, product issues. And you would have noticed before in that slide where I had the backwards and forwards between teams because, someone's processing a piece of work, it's moved on to the next team. The next team has had a look at that work and validated, oh, there's something missing here and it needs to go back into the original team for it to be corrected, amended or adjusted. Typically work that has to be redone due to internal errors or outsourced human error or a bot or a machine error is considered to be internal rework. When we talk about external rework, it can consist of things like incomplete forms, missing information, incomplete orders, and it can be work from external parties or other parts of the business. So even other business units or the branches or the government departments or wherever it might be. It's typically regarded as an error made due to external factors and is not in control of the internal business. So there are many different types of rework for each organisation, and each organisation will have their own way of defining what that is. So, rework definitely needs to be considered. When you're thinking about from a forecasting perspective, we know that we need people to do that work, so we have to consider it. We need resources to execute it, or to either amend it or correct it or correspond or whatever, close the gaps and ensure compliance is adhered to. So it's really critical for any back office business to assess and investigate or rework that actually occurs. There's a number of different benefits in assessing the cause of rework, such as, identifying process improvement opportunities, or it might potentially highlight learning and development concerns. Maybe the learning development program needs to be improved a little bit more, or adjusted to cater for the type of people that you're, or whatever it might be. There could be a whole host of different reasons. Rework is required to be actioned and is considered a necessary but non-value add function. And typically in my experience, when I assess rework in organisations, when we're looking at planning for forecasting and scheduling from a rework perspective, I worked with an organisation historically where up to 40% of their total workload was actually rework. They had so many issues with the way that they were processing work and the miscommunication between departments that it caused this massive amount of additional workload for the business. So there were some really good process improvements that were put in place for that particular example. You absolutely need to make sure that you incorporate your rework in your planning process because we're using people and resources to do it. So we need to know how much work is potentially coming in or what those issues might be that are causing it. We have follow-up and pending. So follow-up is, work that couldn't be moved to the next step. So a piece of work will come in, it's incomplete, we send a response back to the customer asking for more information, or they need to complete the form or whatever it might be. And then it will be pushed, we push it into pending. There's, different terminology in different customers in terms of the way that they're actually utilizing those terms and what work means for them. But typically follow-up means that we're waiting for additional information to be returned back to us so that we can complete that process and move it to the next step or move it to the next team. From a pending perspective, it's typically work that is waiting for a corresponding action. The additional information, requested is required for it to move on to the next step. So, when we're looking at it from a processing perspective, what I typically find is that, a new piece of work will come in, it's incomplete, it needs some additional information, a response is sent off to the customer in order for them to complete the document, send through whatever it is that we're requiring, and then that piece of work will actually be put into a pending queue. So when we think about pending is a little bit different. I'm just going to talk about this for a minute. So pending typically is work that is just sitting there waiting for a response. So if we were to think about it from a resourcing perspective, if we were given the resources to complete the work, could it be done? Should it be considered within your forecasting requirement? There's not a right or wrong answer to that. It's just a requirement to be aware of what it means. Another thing with pending, I found historically, is when working with customers, if they find they've got additional capacity to follow up on some of this work, depending on the teams that they're working with. So let's take audits for an example. You've got a piece of work sitting in a pending queue because you're waiting for audit for information. They'll actually assign resources to work on the pending queue so that they can follow up customers to get the information, to get it moved on to the next piece, because it's either already missed service level, or we're hitting deadlines, or there's a legislative requirement that needs to be complied by. So there's a whole heap of reasons why they might use their staff to get that work done. So when we talk about pending with a customer, it depends on how they're actually handling that work, and that will vary from team to team. So when we're looking at it from a workforce planning perspective, we need to ask the question, does it need to be included in that planning process? Do we need to, and how do we monitor it if not, or does it? So it can be a little bit of a what's the story kind of situation where you have to actually find out what's going on, how they're handling that work. So some other terms that are used in back office that are not in the contact center are terminologies like backlog, WIP, which stands for work in progress or work in process, outstanding work, and overdue work. And that's just a couple. There are so many more, depending on the business, the department, the type of work that a customer is or a business is actually providing to their clients or to their customers. There'll be different terms that are used. Let's just have a look at this in a little bit more detail. So from a backlog perspective, backlog is work that is typically hasn't been started yet. The term can sometimes be used to describe new work that has come into the team and is just sitting there waiting for resources. So backlog can be caused by bottlenecks in the process, either due to insufficient resources or an unexpected influx of work. But backlog can also be acceptable too. So sometimes we'll always carry a backlog depending on what it is that they do, how they operate, service level requirements, and all of those factors that need to be considered. But when an unexpected backlog or bottleneck occurs, it's important to be aware of what impact clearing that work will have to the following team that's processing the next step. So from a WFM perspective, when we're planning it, we do need to consider our backlog and understand what our backlog position is, so that, if there is an impact to a follow-on team, that we can actually communicate that effectively. So, WFM doesn't just sit in one team. We're not just looking at one point of backlog. It's that whole process flow. What does it mean for the customer and journey? So backlog is typically used to describe work that needs to be completed. Work in progress or work in process, it's been given a couple of different terms, and depending on the way that you use it, it can typically mean different things. But if you think about the words and the terms, so work in progress, work in process, it typically means work that has already been started. It's in the process of being completed or is currently in progress. So follow-up work can sometimes be considered as WIP because it's already in the process and it's waiting for that next step to be completed. Outstanding and overdue work. So what work is waiting in the queue to be completed is your outstanding work. So, it's usually waiting and is sometimes are used in place of WIP or backlog. Again, it really comes down to the organisation, terminology and definitions. We don't want to change it. We just need to make sure that we understand what it is that we're actually talking about and the definition of those terms with any business when we're looking at it from a WFM perspective. We then have overdue work, and it's used to describe work that is waiting to be completed but is already outside of the operational service levels. And I say operational service levels, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. There's many different varying terms that are used to describe and categorize work in the back office. They can be interchangeable and are used in different contexts in different organizations. So, and I'll say that again because it really, in my experience, there are different customers will use different words depending on, their experience or the software that they have in their business and the terminology that's used by them. So when you're looking to build your list of tasks, processes, or steps to build your forecast for your workload demand, it's really important to document and articulate the different terms that are used in your back office environment to ensure consistency and understanding of which items require focus, building out your staffing plans. So as you know, all of these terms are used differently. And there's definitely many, many more. I just wanted to talk about a few of them that I typically come across when working in a back office space. Okay, so what is work? What is work in the back office? That's a very good question. Information overload. Like there's so much information, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We have things like turnaround times or handle times, and we also have service levels that we need to consider. So some back office environments will have different service metrics for different types of work, depending on how critical it is. So information overload, anything can actually be measured. There is an absolute abundance of information available in the back office that can be utilised to help you construct a forecasted task list, whether it be activities or processes or whatever it is. There's process maps. We've got, customer journey maps. We have reports. We've got workflow systems. We have customer relationship management systems. There are, production lines. There's just, the list is endless of all of the different information that is available in terms of the way an organisation operates that can be utilised to help work out what is actually work. One of the really cool things that I do typically use is a process map. So your process map provides really valuable information like handoff points and dependencies so that you can see, when a piece of work moves from one department to the next. So in addition to process maps, reports, and the available systems that we actually have access to, we also have managers and SMEs and, subject matter experts in the teams. And we have workflow coordinators. So depending on the way that, whether you've got a CRM system that automatically delivers work, or you have someone that's managing an email queue that is delivering work out to staff. There's lots of different ways where we can delve into the deep knowledge and insight that these people have into the processes. They know their staff, they understand their skills, they know what the drivers are in the business and the impacts that can be, hugely important and incredibly useful when you're building out what your forecast task list is. So, I can't stress it enough. You need to, be sure that you take some time to invest in having those conversations with all of these resources. You'll actually be really surprised what you can uncover. They have some interesting insight in terms of how the business is actually operating for each individual team. So time to complete, turnaround time. Again, we've got so many different names that, are associated with this. So metrics like handle time, standard time, average handle time, reasonable expectancy, turnaround time. There's an abundance of names, again, that are used in the back office to describe how much time it takes to actually complete a piece of work, or what the desired time is that we would like people to take to actually complete the work at the task level. So how do we capture it? This is one of the biggest challenges in back office is how do we capture time? But there's a couple of different ways that it can actually be done. So the first way is source systems. Now, depending on the system that you have, you might be able to extract the actual handle time at the task level. Now, the task level needs to be defined. So what does the handle time look like? Well, that's something that you'd need to work through with the business to understand what that is. But due to the number of disparate systems in the back office, most customers, I find, have either a data warehouse where all of the information you need from a WFM perspective is actually collected and stored. So in some cases, that can be a good data source to start with when you're looking at your WFM build from forecasting perspective, but it's not the end result. So typically when we're looking at reporting, it's that high level process task. Well, what is it that we're actually looking at measuring? What is the start of the actual request coming in, and when's the end? Did we handle it within the service level? So the volumes will be different. You need to really understand what it is that you're actually looking at building out a forecast for and comparing that to what sort of reports are actually available. So in some cases, it is a good data source. And in some cases, you can integrate that with your WFM software. Like I said before, it's not always the case, though. And it is, again, I'm going to say it again, and you're probably already very well aware that handle time is one of the most complex metrics to obtain, but it's one of the most crucial metrics to get right. Getting your turnaround time wrong is absolutely detrimental to all other WFM decisions. So if you do have a software provider, I would suggest working with them to find out, if there are other ways of capturing time. Just because you don't have access to it now doesn't mean it's not available. So I don't know if I can say this, but at Call Design, we've actually got a team of developers, and we've devised a way to actually extract data directly from the source system, whether it be, Salesforce or ServiceNow or any other platform, to calculate for customers at the forecast level what the actual time is that needs to be calculated from a AH2 perspective or a handle time perspective. So there's a couple of different ways of actually doing that. So just because the metric is not available in the reporting data that you have access to in your software system doesn't mean that you can't actually get it. Another process or another way is using desktop processing analytics. We talk a lot about data and AI and processing and all of those sorts of things. And, the DPA tool can be a really good way to identify productive versus non-productive time. So one of the challenges that we do find when we're looking at DPA in a customer environment is, employee behaviour. We need to be mindful of that. The back office is a little bit more lenient in terms of, scheduling staff, when they start, when they finish. So, sometimes staff that work in the back office will start early. They'll grab their coffee, they'll sit down, they'll read the newspaper online, depending on what they've got access to. So that can sometimes affect, the analytic results that are actually coming out. But DPA has become so much more advanced these days that there are ways to be able to actually track it more effectively. So again, if you do have a WFM software and you've got a software provider and they have DPA as a capability, have a conversation with them, because you might find that they're actually able to help derive some sort of handle time or productive versus non-productive time for your business. And the good old-fashioned time and motion studies. Pardon me, sorry. So time and motion studies, we're still using them today. And again, they estimate handle time at the task level. So, although we've got these fantastic systems to help us organise our work and match it to the staff that are skilled, these systems haven't mastered how to measure time to help translate it into a WFM requirement. Remember, that's what we're actually ultimately trying to do. So, but on the other hand, maybe the work is manual and it's not captured in a system at all. So we need some way to be able to measure how much time that might take. Apologies. Okay, so service level. Service level in the back office works a little bit different. There are two different metrics that we talk about when we talk about service level. We've got the customer service level agreement, and that is talking specifically about the service level expectation that we have told our customers where they can expect an answer, expect an outcome. If you think about eBay as an example, when you purchase an item on eBay, it gives you an estimated delivery time. You can expect it by that specific time. That's what your customer service level agreement will imply. When we discuss operations service levels, that's a little bit different. In the back office specifically, because we've got things that we need to consider from a service level perspective to actually get to that end customer goal. So I'm going to talk about that for a minute. Sorry, bear with me for a second. Again, apologies. It is 2:28 a.m. here. So I'm not used to doing so much talking so early in the morning. Okay, so back office service levels. The customer agreement. So that's the actual service agreement for the outcome of the request. We know that. We tell our customers how long it'll be before they can actually expect finalization or a product or a service or an outcome. With relation to loans, it varies, by bank and industry and financial institution. When you purchase something on eBay, as I mentioned before, you get an estimated delivery time. So this is the same for a customer service level. So in this example, I've got a 14-day customer service level for this loan application, referring back to that again. So operations service levels are actually internal metrics. First of all, we have our first part of the process, which sits in the applications team. And I'm going to get my little laser here. Sits in the applications team. We have 5 days in the applications team to get the work done. What might happen from that perspective then is it then moves in. We've got 5 days to get the work done. And then the doc prep team will actually have another 5 days to get that done, which takes us to 10 days, and then 14 days is the end outcome. So the way that it's actually broken down is like this. We have for step 1, we've got a 3-day operational service level. Step 1 has got 3 days to get that work completed. Step 2 is 2 days. But you'll see that it's still 5 days within the applications team. So we've got 2 service level metrics and 2 different types of forecasting requirements. The third step is the 5-day operational service level, which will take us up to 10 days from a customer perspective. So we've got another 5 days for the doc prep team to get the loan document preparation steps completed and ready for it to move on to the next step. It's really not a lot of time when you think about it, because from a doc prep perspective, we've got to send the documents out to the customer, they've got to sign them, we've got to hopefully get them back within that period of time. So there are considerations when you're looking at the service level versus what you're achieving, whether it's a customer impact that's delayed your actual goal. And then from the last step, we have the 4 days are left. We've got 4 days in the finalisation team to get the last step done, get the approvals finalised, and have the payments made so that money is in the customer's account on day 14. Ultimately, that's our goal. But what you'll notice is that we have 3 different teams that have handled this request from end to end. we have 4 different service levels based on the different types of work. And this is a really high level view. But in reality, what we actually see is in this loan document preparation space, they might have 10 different types of tasks that need to be forecasted for, because the complexity of the work that the customer that is required to actually get to the end result, ensuring that legislation has been applied by, and that there's a whole host of I's that need to be dotted, T's that need to be crossed. We've got signatures and expectations. So service levels from an operational perspective can be quite vast. And again, you need to consider with each of these different teams that you're working with, what are the different types of work that they do? How many items are in each of those? What does the handle time look like for each of those? What is the service level for each of those? So, from a WFM perspective, when we're looking at working out how many staff we need, and creating our staffing plans to service the customer need, we need to, first of all, understand what the workload is. Workforce management is workforce management. The statistics, the analysis, it's all the same. But the challenge with implementing that into the back office is understanding what the work is. So, if we have what the volume is for each of those forecast groups, or those different tasks, or those activities, whatever they might be, we need the turnaround time, which is the TAT. Abbreviated. It could be AHT, it could be, reasonable expectancy, it could be expected time. You need to think about and understand what metric you're going to use from a handle time perspective. And then we divide it by the period. So, we've got the volume multiplied by the AHT, and we divide it by the period. It's still consistent across the back office as well. So, if you're working out how much work you've got in a single day, then you would work it out based on the minutes of your AHT and the minutes that you've got to handle it within the day, depending on whether your service level requirement, and that will actually get considered in the last, the next step with relation to your bodies in chairs. So, it adds that next level of staffing need, expanding. It's not just, when you're looking at it from a staffing perspective in the back office, we're not just talking about, well, how much work is there and how many people do I need? You've still got a service level that you have to achieve. So, it really needs to be considered around, what does that actually look like? And bear with me for a moment. I'm having some issues with my slide deck. Okay. Sorry. So we've got our service level, we've got our workload. The next step is shrinkage. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we do need to actually calculate, like we do in the contact center, how many staff we actually need in our business to service the customer demand. It's same, but different. So within the service level agreement, we need to meet our obligations, not only to our customers, but also to our staff. So all shrinkage types, including, planned and unplanned shrinkage, like leave, sick leave, team meetings, training, coaching, projects, breaks, lunches, all of those activities where it's actually taking staff away from being productive need to be considered in our shrinkage. We need to make sure that we're including all of the things that make our staff feel valued. So, when we're looking at shrinkage from a team perspective, it can change and it can vary. It's not like in a contact center where you'll have, potentially a consistent shrinkage across each of the teams, and maybe slightly higher, slightly lower. But, if you're talking about an audit team or a compliance team, they may have additional shrinkage because staff need to have some reading time to make sure that they're up to date with all legislations and government requirements and all of the legalities that are required for the types of work that they do. So, it's really important to make sure that each team shrinkage requirement is considered and factored when you're building out your plans from a back office perspective. It's really, really important to meet with leaders. And I'm going to stress that all the way through. because it's not like you're walking into an environment that is experienced and well versed in what WFM looks like and how WFM can help. So it's really your job as a workforce manager to uncover and draw out from your managers what are the things that need to be considered. So, it's really interesting when you're working in the back office space because it is very different. And we need to think about what are those variances that we need to consider. And we've got to remember we're not going in there to take over the business. We're going in to actually help managers manage their people. And we've got to remember that they are people managers. When it comes to shrinkage, there's no best practice. The value, it's different for each of the different teams. So there's definitely value in when it comes to the right amount of shrinkage when you're planning, and it truly depends on the business requirements. It's also important to become familiar with, when you're planning out your shrinkage, your EBAs, contractual agreements and legislative requirements, fair work trading laws, all those sorts of things, and other potential agreements that leaders will have had with their staff. So, the back office, it's a little bit more flexible. Leaders have more autonomy, they have more oversight and decision making to make those agreements with their staff. So it's really important to understand what does that actually look like. There absolutely is great value in providing a robust, data-driven, forecasted staffing predictions into the back office. I'm going to say it 100 times, recommend starting with a pilot team, collaborate with the manager, get them involved very early and refine your discovery and design process. Reassess if you need to make sure that your numbers are valid, and make sure that you get the first one right before you get sign off from the manager and then move on to the next one. So, working with a pilot team to refine your process is really important. So why have I placed so much emphasis on forecasting? Well, forecasting, as we know, as WFM experts, it sets the basis for all staffing decisions. So, when we're looking at our base staffing requirements, we need to get it right. We're providing the business with really valuable insight that empowers our leaders to make data-driven decisions and proactively staffing decisions, and making those decisions with confidence. So, it's really important to make sure that you're having those conversations with managers, you're going back to them and you're validating it and making sure that they are agreeing. And what you're seeing is, absolutely what you would potentially present to the managers to help them run their business on a day-to-day basis. So, forecasting absolutely provides a huge amount of value in the back office, and just as much as it does in the contact center. So that's why forecasting is so important. Dan, have there been any questions?
I'm not seeing any, but as you were talking, one point that kind of stood out to me was the importance of involving the leadership, right? And I know you've talked about connecting with them, making sure that you're able to access that information. And I think as WFM professionals, we often are so focused on data, right? The hard numbers around it all, that we forget, especially in the back office space, the importance of qualitative and quantitative data, right? When we are so challenged to get that turnaround time, when we're so challenged to get firm numbers around volume, I think it's easy for us to disqualify the leadership's knowledge. That's just your gut. Like, what do you know? And I think as WFM professionals, we need to kind of have a little more humility around that. Like, they know a lot. These back office leaders know a ton, and we have got to include their voice when we're thinking about this. It needs to be qualitative and quantitative data coming into our forecast.
Absolutely.
Does that strike you as right? And like, I guess one question I have is, how do you get them to talk? Like, how do you get that information out of the leaders?
Yeah. And I kind of touched this on the next the next session, but that's okay.
Okay.
we can talk about it now. But it's about engagement. So we, as WFM experts in the contact center, we know it is a lot about the data, and we are the contact center is so much more mature. We've got reporting, we've got statistics, we've got real time management, and we don't have that in the back office. The managers have been working autonomously for such a long time that it's interesting to see how the different ways, and I guess that I've got so many thoughts going on in my head. I don't know where to start. But really, to get the managers talking is about communication. You've got to involve them in the decision making, and I do talk about this, in the next section, because that's one of the most critical things, right? Is getting the leaders on board. A leader can actually, I'm going to say this again, can kibosh your WFM program if they choose not to believe it. They don't give you the information. You don't get the insight from them. You can take all the data that you want, but it's not going to give you the result that you need. If we talk about reporting as an example, so when we're looking at reporting and building out our task list from a forecasting perspective, reports are great because they talk about, they give us a list of where to start. But, as we had a look at with that loan processing practice, there are so many different work items and tasks that are required within a single team. Let's say we've got a team of 15 people. There's going to be a lot more work for them to do. And these managers have been flying solo for such a long time. They know their business. They know what they're talking about. And, gaining their confidence and that insight from them is one of the biggest challenges with WFM. And it really is about, that increased communication, getting them on board. And that it's two-way conversation. You've got to listen. You have to listen.
Absolutely.
You might know WFM, but they know their business.
Well, this probably isn't the right kind of metaphor or image in my mind, but at least as we're talking about this, it for me, it's the difference between that NCIS, that investigator that the homicide investigator that comes in versus the late night host. Right.
Yeah.
Like I think so many of us have been like, it's just gonna be the facts. It's just I'm all I can, right. And I'm gonna drill the witnesses and get we need to have a broader conversation, I think, with some of these leaders, right? When we come in with that approach of like, tell me everything you know, and if it doesn't match, then I'm getting rid of it. Like it needs to be this kind of more natural, more, I don't want to say charismatic, but more caring, if I can use that word, conversation. Like I'm here to help. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. I'm not here to kind of come in heavy-handed on your team. I want to help support you, right? And I have found that almost that late night host, right? I don't know how much you've seen, but they talk so little. Those late night hosts talk so infrequently, and it's just they know how to ask the right questions to engage the person to be able to tell their stories. And I think as WFM professionals, that's a skill that we can improve upon, especially as we come into the back office space. How can you get those leaders to not just give you the facts, because you need them, but how can you get them talking and explaining the environment? Because I think it's going to be on those broader questions and those broader conversations that you're going to find out all of these extra pieces of work that you were just talking about, right? The need to maintain regulation, the need to be able to read this, the need to be able to go over here, that you might not have realized is an important part of how you're going to define work. That's going to be an important part of how you're going to define either volume or time. So I think at least for me, that's how I'm thinking about these conversations. It needs to be more late night host, less like homicide detective.
I love that analogy, Dan. That's absolutely perfect. I haven't heard it described like that before, but that was awesome.
That's just, I don't know. It's just at least that as you were talking and as I was thinking about it, I'm like, we're just investigating too much. We need to have a conversation, and that's, I think, would be a little bit more beneficial.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Right. So do we have a break coming up, or do you have some more slides? Okay, there it is. So as a reminder, again, if you've come in a little bit late, we're going to give everyone a break. I know, Laura, you probably need some water. You've been kind of solo talking for so long. We appreciate you being on with us. We got just one more section. So we're going to have 15 minutes here. Check your email, put out a couple fires, get some water. I know myself, I'm going to go start prepping lunch. My kids probably need to eat here in a minute, so I'm going to start figuring out what that looks like. But we'll come back in about 15 minutes, and we've got one more session with Laura. So don't go anywhere. And thanks, Laura, so much. This has been great.
Thanks, Dan.